What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to OperaAnna. Welcome to my channel. My name is Anna. I am an opera singer and I am here to opera up your life. If you are new here, it probably means that the algorithm knows that you want to see more opera, but then fun. Not the way it's usually presented where people act like you know everything already. That's not what we do here. We have context, we educate, so let's get into it, shall we? Today we're looking at the aria Les Seigneurs, Salut from Giacomo Meyerbeer's grand opera Les Huguenots. And it's an aria that I myself have been singing for like 3 years? 4 years? 3 years. I literally remember going into a coaching with this piece and being super nervous. And we ran through it and my coach was just like, why exactly were you nervous again? That was awesome. And since then, it's only gotten more and more fun to sing. So I'm super excited to get into it. Let's talk about Les Seigneurs, Salut. So Giacomo Meyerbeer's opera Les Huguenots belongs to the genre of opera known as grand opera, grand opéra in French.
Enchanté.
Which is basically just what it sounds like. Grand opera incorporated even larger stagings, even more instruments in the orchestra pit than ever before. And just to give you an idea, the first of its kind was an opera by Daniel Francois Aubert, in which Mount Vesuvius is supposed to erupt at the end of the opera. That's the type of subject matter we're working with, and I don't think I need to tell you why that specific opera is not staged very often anymore. And Giacomo Meyerbeer, our composer today, was widely accepted as the king of grand opera. He was able to write super interesting and melodic lines with really inventive orchestral colors, all while forming a theatrical whole that kept the Parisian audience enticed for 5 acts and a ballet. And he knew that audiences didn't just want gorgeous music, although that's a given, but they were looking for stories that were dramatic and interesting, going so far as to hire a second librettist for Les Huguenots in order to flesh out the characters more than his current librettist had done. Technically, he even worked with a third librettist after going to Italy for a time when his wife was sick, where he consulted with the librettist of his previous operas, librettist Gaetano Rossi, who advised him in rewriting the role of Marcel. His efforts were not wasted musically or textually because Les Huguenots was popular right from the get-go, and it was the first opera ever to have 1,000 performances at the Paris Opera. Like, this opera is fire, okay? Meanwhile, thanks to a fun little composer I like to call Richard Wagner and the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany at this time, Meyerbeer's music was banned in Germany and it is not very often played today. Oh yeah, but we'll get into that. Don't you worry. So let's get into some juicy context. I love me some context. It's like opera foreplay. It just makes everything that comes after so much better. For all you history buffs out there, you will know that the Huguenots, Les Huguenots, are simply anyone who practiced Protestantism in the 15th and 16th centuries in France. They faced intense persecution, and as such, the action of this opera, Les Huguenots, takes place during the French Wars of Religion and culminates on the day of the St. Bartholomew Massacre, which took place from August 24th to August 25th in 1572, although arguably much longer as it dissipated outside of Paris and violence continued to spread throughout the country. But as the opera opens and we are introduced to our protagonists, a couple of our protagonists, the Catholic Count of Nevers and the Protestant Raoul de Nangy, the atmosphere is light-ish. There's anticipation for sure, and the tension in the global situation in Paris at this time is at an all-time high. But in my opinion, Meyerbeer doesn't write foreboding music into his score as one might expect in an opera that provides a lead up to a massacre and attempted religious genocide. Raoul de Nangis has been sent by the king in an attempt to encourage peace between the Catholics and the Huguenots. The Count of Nevers is a famous womanizer, and he's just announced that he is engaged and so must give up his mistress. Boys being boys, I guess, he invites everyone at this get-together to sort of recount their previous spicy encounters. Raoul is the first to go. He has a story of having just saved a damsel in distress, like on his way to the party, and in doing so instantly fell in love with her. He has absolutely no idea who she is, but he recognizes her as the woman who comes to talk to the Count of Nevers halfway through the party, aka the Count of Nevers' fiance. This little lady has also fallen in love with Raoul and has come to break off her engagement with the Count of Nevers because of it. But of course, the Count doesn't tell Raoul this, so now Raoul thinks that he's gotten himself involved in a complicated love triangle with the very person that he was supposed to be trying to make nice with. You still with me? We got it? I think that was pretty good, right? Let's keep going.
Ooh, now you lost me.
As soon as this happens, a page to the Count of Nevers arrives with a letter, but no one besides the page knows who it's for. Wow. This page, finally in the spotlight for once at this gigantic party, decides to take the spotlight for himself and sings this aria, Noble Seigneur, salut, which I don't think I have to translate for you.
Not the way it's usually presented, where people act like you know everything already.
But if I do, it means good sirs, hello, more or less. Noble sirs, salut.
Nailed it.
We are going to be looking at two very different interpretations of this aria to get a feel for the range of color and sheer creativity that can be brought to this aria. And for my patrons, stick around because I'm going to be looking at my own interpretation of this and basically tearing myself apart. No, I'm not. I'm just going to talk about my own experience singing this aria while also watching myself sing the aria. Here we go. Starting with the lovely Susanne Johnston, straight out of Straya. Is that good? Is that a good accent? Straya.
No.
So without further ado, Noble Seigneur, salut. Okay, now, it doesn't happen in these two versions, but I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I have heard this first page, these first few bars, at every single tempo known to man, sometimes much slower. Dun 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 dun, like that. And also like this. Dun 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 dun. Da-da-da-dun. I prefer this, so I'm glad we're not looking at something that's much slower, because otherwise, if it's really slow, you don't get this gorgeous fluty lightness that Urbain carries as a gender fluid page. Okay, couple things. The number of hours that I have spent on this phrase alone, it's insane. Meyerbeer leads us through some weird chord progressions, which trip me up for weeks. But I think it's also so interesting just the way that Susanne Johnston sings. She opens her mouth and it just like goes. Meanwhile, a lot of people are kind of like busy with the body and like putting it through, which I don't think is bad, but I think it's just very interesting how she doesn't need any of that. But let's look at how mezzo-soprano Sigrid Onegin sings this in 1929 with no video, unfortunately, but hey, it was 1929. What do you want? Oh my God. Firstly, nobody does this first phrase technically correctly. Nobody. Noble seigneurs, salut. It's a 16th triplet, and everyone, including myself, stretches it out. But there's something so fun as well about not doing that in time, because you have this opportunity to really just hang out on that top F, which Onegin does longer than anyone I've ever heard do it. I think there's already a gigantic difference between the way Johnston approaches these phrases and the way Onegin approaches these phrases. And obviously this part. One of the most virtuosic effects in bel canto singing, the mezza di voce, start piano, crescendo into mezzo forte forte, and then decrescendo back down to piano. And then these staccato syncopations up to a high A that sound like she's laughing, which I think is just so funny. Whereas Johnston just like blazes through all of them. And in general, just feels like Onegin's is way more playful at this point. When a composer gives you a line or lines like this, it's such a shame to blaze through them without thinking about why Meyerbeer gives so much attention to an aria for a page. More on this later. Seigneur. Now, I'd like to caveat what I'm about to say with the fact that I am still to this day working on getting this vowel exactly right. Is such a weird vowel to vocalize on. It is the stuff of nightmares, at least my nightmares. Having said that, I don't love the almost nasal quality that comes in as she descends this line. As she starts coming down, you hear that she collapses a bit in her positioning in order to get the vowel correct, and compromises this richness and the resonance that she has when she was on that top note. Again, so much you could have done with it. I love the look of the two guys are like, okay. So of course we already know who this woman is, because I told you. But obviously Count of Nevers and company do not. So Urbain takes this moment to tease, for lack of a better word, the present company with the information: a woman of nobility and grace, of whom all the kings would be jealous, has just given me a letter to present to one of you. Now, who wouldn't be intrigued? I mean, right? There it is. Wow. Okay. My guy was a bit late with this gag. She already pulls it away before he's like going for it. I always like to play with the idea that not only is Urbain teasing everyone like who's going to be the lucky one, but also that he wants to be it himself. He also wants to be the recipient of this letter. He won't ever be able to land a lady like the princess, like Valentine. So there's this sense of yearning, I think, that comes from him. And I think it gives him, just like I try to give to Cherubino, gives him validity as a person and not just this vehicle for comic relief. And I haven't even mentioned the ambiguity that comes with this being written for a woman. Not uncommon in this time, but which carries with it an added layer, should we say, of being a woman pretending to be a man, taunting the men, dangling the prospect of yet another woman in the form of this letter for a room full of men who in some productions can barely control themselves trying to get it. Did that make sense?
Wow, it's like a dirty math problem.
Should I watch that back and make sure it made sense? There's Marcel. Having sung this so often and trying to find playfulness and arrogance and teasing in every single note, it's a little weird to me how little the staging actually incorporates this into this aria. The men are just standing around listening to him, and he's also just standing there with the letter being like, I have this thing. They could grab it at any point. Like, they tried that one gag and then that was it. And I'm not saying I like it when they're just like moving back and forth, running across the stage, trying to get the letter every time, because those also exist. And I think it's really annoying. But the almost laughably simplistic orchestration that Meyerbeer writes here is not unlike the famous papa, papa of Rossini, who was looking for the singer to be the main point of attention at all times, which makes it all the more strange that she doesn't do anything with this music. Not in the staging, but like in the coloring, in the text, like trying to bring out a specific word on this climax of a phrase, let's call it that, climax phrase, without naming this woman. Let's honor the man that she has chosen. On the word choisi, it's the last word in the phrase, Meyerbeer writes not one, not two, but 3 fermatas. And friends, what does a fermata mean in bel canto? What do we think it means? Coming from the word fermare, which means to stop. You can't know this. I didn't tell you what it means. But a fermata in this time, and for many composers, Rossini, Donizetti, Mozart, and Meyerbeer, it means that you have the option to ornament, to do whatever you want. Add a little high note, add some scales going up and down, add an arpeggio, add a mezzo di voce, like something. 3 fermatas. 3. Let's see what Onegin does with this, shall we? Okay, wait a second. Hold on. Hold the phone. Hold the phone. The legato, the flexibility, the rubato, the written ornamentation that seems just not be registered by Johnston. There's a little written in, and Johnston just doesn't do it. And the endless cadenza on choisi with a trill that I am definitely stealing. Why in the world do we refuse to ornament this? Every single contemporary interpretation I've seen of this, and so then also did myself, nobody ornaments it. Let's stop that. I want to ornament it. Let's do that. And if I may for a second address the elephant in the room. For any singers watching this, you might remember that I just listed Mozart in the composers who write for modas as an option to ornament. At which point you may have said to yourself, that's weird. I thought we were taught not to ornament Mozart. That it's not in the style of Mozart, or Mozart wrote it perfectly, don't touch it. And no, this isn't a video about Mozart, so perhaps I should take some of the advice given in my comments and just stop talking. But let's just remember that Mozart was the bridge between the Baroque period and the classical period of music. He innovated in a way that would have given Henry Ford a frickin' run for his money, but he is still in essence a student of the Baroque. The era in which they literally had you go to the beginning of an aria, repeat the whole thing, so that you could embellish it. The equivalent of the composer going, here, surprise me. A full carte blanche to just change shit. That's where he grew up in. And then we're told that we're not supposed to ornament Mozart because it's not in the style. If he puts a fermata in, we're not supposed to do something with it. Whereas Rossini, who came later, were allowed to do that. Make it make sense for me. Make it make sense. So if you bought into the whole, we don't ornament Mozart here, like I did, and by implication anything else that isn't Rossini or the Baroque period, I invite you to revisit this line of thought. But back to Meyerbeer. So I think you'll notice the extreme difference in how Johnston and Onegin approach the space between the notes, or how they carry one note to the other. Onegin just kind of links everything together in a portamenti ornamentation much more often than we would think tasteful today. I'm definitely not saying that one is better than the other. It's just simply part of the taste of how we interpret things today. And there's no reason why it couldn't shift back or change in other ways in the future. So there's this constant stretching and squishing again of the tempo, known as rubato, that she employs. Today we would just go through it in the tempo. We just go through it. And I love the body that she takes the time for la bona. A richness that even on a recording this primitive is very evident. We just don't have an idea for the size of the voice, which I think is really a shame. These types of recordings stripped away a lot of the actual color and the timbre. It's also very interesting how she takes charge of this orchestra. She is 100% in charge of this orchestra. They follow exactly what she's doing. It just gives her so much freedom to do whatever she wants. Rubin here says basically no man has ever had such good luck to receive such a letter, basically. And I think this section really leaves the most room open for interpretation because of all the written the written ornamentation that has little to no indication of how it should be performed, either dynamic or otherwise. Onegin takes it just so differently from Johnston. She was, of course, much closer to the time in which it would have been performed with the composer. Let's look at Onegin's right now. I love her trill. Ugh, I love her trill. I don't want to be mean to Johnston, but she's the first one I watched when I was first studying this aria, and I thought it was incredible that, her flexibility and just being able to open her mouth, and it seemed like it was absolutely no work at all. But now listening to Onegin's, the general, especially almost everything, but especially here, the general shape of this makes so much more sense to me. Even though I prefer Johnston's no, A, because that's how I hear it in my brain, because that's what I do. I just think it makes a lot more sense. And B, I think it's more fun and moves it along. Doing both of these things, which are basically the exact same line at the same tempo, like, what is the point of doing it again then? There's no, actual difference. Onegin's approach to these extended turns continuously get faster. I don't know if you clock that. I'll play it again for you. I think it's just so playful and interesting, and I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. Of course, it gets a little faster, it gets more exciting, it gets higher, it gets louder, whatever. But I wish both of them did more with the high A flat, high A. No, it's a high A. The high A that Meyerbeer gives you. I would say that in this phrase, there are two climaxes. So the high A being the first climax at the high note, and then falling down into the sequence of da 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 da. Da, 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 ending on a trill, or the second climax, if you will, because it's a leading tone to get into the next phrase. So it feels like, why do we just skip over one of the main parts of this phrase? Why do we just, if it were me, I like to breathe just before the lead into the trill. I even have it written down on my score. Just before the lead into the trill, so I can carry the trill over into the next phrase and make it this super long, gorgeous thing that keeps the audience on their toes. But that's just me. So now we have the last section, a return of the melody that we heard before. And now Urbain tries to reassure everyone, I promise I'm not lying. She's real. The message is real. One last to bring all the attention to himself once again. Again, the coloratura, why? Just, ugh. So it's not just a question when studying an aria like this, why should the coloratura mean something within the context of the aria, but also in the context of the opera as a whole. Urbain says, I salute you and may God protect your battles and your loved ones, which seems like a normal thing to say, especially in this time. But when we zoom out and realize that at least 3 of the people in this room will be dead by the time the curtain falls, this line takes on so much more importance and sort of gravitas. The Count of Nevers, Raoul, Marcel, the guy that was sort of in the shadows that we saw before, his servant, Raoul's servant, and Valentine, although she's not in the room at the moment, they will all die. because they either refused to renounce their religion as a Protestant or defended Protestants against the attacking Catholics. I didn't explain it really fully, but the St. Bartholomew Day massacre is the attempt basically at a religious genocide orchestrated by Catherine of Medici to get rid of the Protestants, to get rid of the Huguenots. And it failed, but it was brutal. It was brutal. And this opera basically culminates, like I said, in that day. I have a couple things. Why you would barrel through that coloratura makes no sense to me. There's a fermata on that high C, first of all. Even if you don't ornament it, just like chill out for a second. It's the highest note in the entire friggin' thing. Why are you just gonna Like, no. She sings it vocally well. Like, it's all there. And I don't want to dump on Johnston, like I said. It might not even have been her choice. It might have been the conductor or the director. Like, I don't know. If you're just singing notes technically well because they're on the page, then why should I care? Why should I care if even with subtitles and staging, I don't actually know how your character feels about this? I don't see a real emotion on her face. It's not really clear what she's doing. And if I'm a new opera goer, I'm not going to necessarily know that this is supposed to be funny or that this is supposed to be playful or whatever. Like, she's not giving me everything that I need to know with just the singing. Does that make sense? That's what I want. Let's watch Onegin do it. So just the fact that she does something that I'm not expecting makes me smile. It means that she thought about the phrasing of this line. Even if it's not the exact phrasing that I would take, it's still something. And she decides to do something on that high C and then just glides down the scale. And it becomes a choice and not just, oh yeah, there's more notes here. I'm sorry, it's so dark in here. It got really dark in here all of a sudden. But you can hear the coloring on vos amours, like this delicious little strawberry of a word. And that makes me happy. Then I like hear something as a listener, even if I don't understand what that means literally. I understand. I feel this like emotion behind it. I will say one thing though, on this arpeggio going back up, she sings a note that I don't think is written, or at least I don't have it in my score. So I'm not really sure what happened there. It's just an F major scale, so I don't really understand. Just an F major scale, and she's also in a different key, but that might just be the recording. She goes to the 7th. Yeah, that's actually, I mean, it's cool. Maybe she ornamented it and added something in that would made me go, oh, that's cool. What happened there? So sadly, Meyerbeer's works are not performed very often nowadays for multiple reasons. They're expensive as hell to get up because of the grandeur of his grand operas. The sets in particular, of course, literally 5 acts. The difficulty of casting Les Huguenots was famous for having the Night of 7 Stars because it prepared with huge names who all had like decently big roles and could show off what they could do, and asked for one night of performing probably more than I make in an entire year. So like, it's expensive. And because, like I said before, thanks in part to our friend Richard Wagner, Meyerbeer's music was completely banned in Germany from 1933 to 1945. When they met, Wagner was relatively unknown and was a huge admirer of Meyerbeer's, and he was just lauded praise onto the already successful Meyerbeer, while he basically profited off of Meyerbeer's help and advice and goodwill. Meyerbeer helped him get both Rienzi and Der Fliegende Holländer off the ground, but only a few years later, Wagner turned on him after achieving even more success, arguably, than Meyerbeer did with his Ring Cycle, and called Meyerbeer's music, quote, effect without cause. So all of these things combined with grand opera basically falling out of style ensured that Meyerbeer was almost completely ignored in the operatic repertoire during the later half of the 20th century. Hopefully that is starting to change. Les Huguenots was performed in 2011 in Brussels and in 2018 in Paris, back home in the city where it was the first opera to achieve 1,000 performances. And if you ever get to see it in person, hopefully you will understand it just that much better for having seen this video. Thank you so much for joining me today to Opera Up Your Life. If you'd like to see more of OperaAnna, please subscribe to the channel. Please like this video and leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of today's aria and today's singers. Like I said, they're completely different. So it's really interesting to hear what you guys have to say about the two interpretations. If you'd like to see the extended version of this aria explained, you can sign up for my Patreon in the description box below, as well as follow me on Instagram at opera.anna to opera up your life every day. It is so fun over on the Patreon. We're getting ready to have our second opera watch party, and we're going to be watching La Boheme. It's going to be a ton of fun. I hope you guys will consider subscribing to the OperaAnna Patreon and coming to join the party. Thank you so much to all of my current Patreon subscribers for helping to make this video possible. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Addio.